What is up, guys? It is Styx here, and today I'm going to be bringing you guys a hunter build. This one is focused on explosions, particularly of the solar variety, but it could also include strand and stasis explosions as well. Now, starting off with our exotic, we are going to be using the relativism, the hunter class item exotic. This will be rocking the Spirit of Inmost Light so that using our abilities empowers the other two, improving our recharge times and damage, and Spirit of Verity so that our weapon final blows will grant us increased grenade damage via the Death Throws buff. We're aiming to get at least 150 grenade stat with a couple of grenade fonts, but you can change this split however you want based on the armor you've rolled. After this, I like to hit at least 70 to 80 super, and I like to go for as much weapons as possible with a good amount of class energy. I'd say as long as you hit like 60 class, you will get it very, very frequently. But you can always go higher if you want to use Ascension, which is one of the aspects we're using, more frequently. For the weapons, I am rocking either Mint Retrograde, depending on the content. I'm going to be pulling this into some Grandmaster minus 40 content to show it off a little bit for the gameplay in the background, so that is what I'm loading in on my character at the moment. You can also use Festival Flight if you are less worried about anti-barrier champions, which you might be anyway because Radiant will give you anti-barrier on any non-championed weapon to begin with. If you do run Festival Flight, I recommend Demolitionist and One for All, as this will allow it to do a large amount of damage and will reload itself whenever you use your grenade, in addition to giving you extra grenades, period. Another good option would be Blast Distributor, as this would allow you to have an even lower grenade stat while having functionally the same amount of extra damage and uptime. For our Yeartide Apex, which is the energy weapon we'll be using, I recommend rocking either Heal Clip, Attrition Orbs, or Demolitionist with either Chaos Reshaped or Burning Ambition. All of these setups will allow you to really take advantage of the rest of the build to get our abilities back really quickly, to stay healed up, and to apply extra explosions or damage using these weapons. Burning Ambition is a newer perk that applies Scorched on hit, and it particularly applies better to something that is already scorched by an ability. So using this in combination with some of our other stuff will be really nice. And then Chaos Reshape just gives a ton of extra damage for free. For the heavy weapon, I could highly recommend Parasite, just as a fun thing. It's something I like to use in my free time, though I don't bring it very much into the high-level solo ops because I run swords for the extra speed, so I can do them as quickly as possible because I don't like running them very much. If you want something that is more a consistent damage or more for like solo boss damage that you can just throw it on and forget about it, Dragon's Breath is really nice because it auto-loads very quickly if you have the Catalyst. In addition to that, it creates fire sprites on kills, so when you drop this onto something like a boss enemy or a champion that's surrounded by ads, you'll have a ton of fire sprite spawn, more solar ignitions, more of pretty much everything you want from this build. For the class abilities, I recommend rocking Prismatic Hunter and either Silence and Squall, Silk Strike, or Tether. Now, the main thing to keep in mind here is what set of buffs you want. I am liking Silk Strike because it allows me to move around really quickly since you can grapple in it. So even though I'm technically not using the grapple grenade, I can use the Silk Strike super to then grapple around and move around really quickly, in addition to giving me a near unkillable buff type deal because I'm in a super. Silence and Squall is really nice for just throwing on hard-hitting enemies, unstoppables, anything of that sort. That will just slow them down. It'll break them out of their unstop. For example, if you throw it on an overload, it instantly stuns them too. It's just in general really nice for dealing with tankier enemies, and it applies a bunch of darkness debuffs, which can be helpful to a lot of the other aspects of the build. It also benefits from one of our fragments. And then Tether is just all around very nice for anything like an onslaught, or if you're trying to protect an area in any kind of mission or solo ops or anything like that. Like I know some of the solo ops missions will have you sit and transmat some items. You can drop tethers onto yourself for that. I think the best of these is probably overall Silk Strike, just because we're going to be running with Elemental Coalescence. So every time we defeat targets, we'll basically be creating extra tangles on top of the tangles we would normally create from Threaded Spike. But if you prefer one of the other elemental pickups, Tether and Silence and Squall are 100% valid options here. For the dodge, go with Gambler's Dodge to increase uptime on Threaded Spike is a necessary part of the loop here. It's going to help us generate tangles, and in addition to that, it recharges extremely quickly, which lets us keep up the Spirit of Inmost Light. Swarm Grenade is really efficient at applying Scorch and Ignition. It's also our Solar Prismatic Grenade, and since this build primarily runs off of Prismatic, it's definitely the one we're going to want to run. You'll generate a lot of Light Transcendence energy here, and a lot of explosions, which will help us power our first aspect, Gunpowder Gamble. This allows you, when defeating targets with abilities, elemental debuff damage, or solar weapons, you charge up a Gunpowder Gamble improvised solar explosion. It basically takes place of your grenade temporarily, and then you can shoot it midair, and it will cause an ignition. This was recently buffed to not only deal less damage to you, but also do more damage in general, and then combined with everything going on with Solstice, the new weapons, all of this stuff going on and the seasonal artifact mods, it is Gunpowder Gamble's time to shine. You get 3 fragment slots, you deal tons of damage. In the short I posted earlier today, I showed it just in a simple little firing range with like 12 enemies. You kill a bunch of them with Ascension or something, and then you Gunpowder Gamble, and you have 3 Gunpowder Gambles nearly in a row. Speaking of which, Ascension. You will use this instead of your dodge. It will use whatever your air move key is. You jump up in the air, you use the key, and then what it'll do is it'll launch you further into the air, and then it will amplify yourself and allies and jolt targets. Now, the amplify allies will, if you are running with a fire team, proc another one of our seasonal artifact mods, which I believe is called Elemental Benevolence, which, granting allies an elemental buff, will give class ability energy. So that gives the allies amplified, which gives you extra class ability energy, which allows you to recharge your class ability even faster and spam Ascension more. Now, if you're running solo, I'll recommend something else when I get to the seasonal mods bit. For now, the fragments we're going to use are the Facet of Courage, which all of our Arc, Solar, and Void abilities will deal increased damage to targets afflicted with darkness debuffs. As far as I'm aware, this will include both Gunpowder Gamble and the standard Swarm Grenade. So when you apply something like your Threaded Spike Sever, you will gain extra damage on your grenades just because of that, and that will also apply to any other debuffs that are applied by your allies or any other abilities and weapons you might have. Facet of Sacrifice I'm using as a stand-in for Facet of Dawn because this season kind of renders Facet of Dawn unnecessary because you have several seasonal mods that apply Radiant to yourself nearly for free or with very little input from yourself specifically. Facet of Sacrifice, whenever you have an Arc, Solar, or Void buff, meaning Void Overshield, Invisibility, Amplified, Radiant, anything like that, your ability Final Blows will grant bonus Darkness Transcendence energy. I run this because the primary weapons we're going to use are Solar, and the primary abilities we're going to use to get kills and deal damage are Solar, so that's light energy. So this will balance out some of the Transcendence energy you get, and you want to spam Transcendence every single time you get it. Even if there's only a few enemies around, you're going to get it so frequently that you might as well use it every single time that it is charged up. It also gives a free +10 grenade, which is just a nice little cherry on top. The next fragment I recommend would be Facet of Purpose. Picking up an Orb of Power will grant you, once again, this is where I mentioned the super coming into play here. If you're using Silk Strike, it'll give you Woven Mail. If you're using Tether, it gives you Overshield. If you were using Silence and Squall, it gives you Frost Armor. It costs a little bit of your class ability, but in reality it is worth it. To be honest, Facet of Purpose is just right now really good to run on pretty much any prismatic build you do, just because of how nice all of those buffs are and how they tie into different seasonal mods, because a lot of them have several different buffs that can be applied to you that will all fit the mod. Facet of Mending is very nice. Grenade Final Blows will cure you. Well, most of your damage is going to be coming from your grenades, so that fits really well. And then Transcendence Grenade Final Blows will cure you, I believe it's cure times 2. So you will get an extra burst of Facet of Ruin is super essential for this. We want as many explosions as possible. We want to blow everything up. This will increase our ignitions. This will increase our stasis explosions if you use Silence and Squall. This will give you just a ton of explosions. Also, plus 10 weapon stat. Once again, just nice cherry on top. Now, seasonal mods. Whatever champion mods you want. I'm rocking the Solar SMG from Solstice, so I'm using Overload Rapid Fire. And then I'm rocking, whenever I need it, the Anti-Barrier Scout for Mint Retrograde. In the second column, Flame Fiber and Freeze, combine Solar and Strand into one Siphon mod. There you go. You're going to want Tightly Woven, so that when you have Woven Mail, you will, with your Silk Strike, I assume, if you're not using Silk Strike and you don't have an ally giving you Woven Mail, you would probably want either Frost Armor on this, or if you're not using Squall or Silk Strike, you could run Diviner's Discount for discounted scavenger mods, but it's probably just not as good as running Silk Strike or Silence and Squall here. In the third column, I'm going to recommend Fever and Chill. This is the mod that single-handedly makes Dawn an irrelevant fragment until this artifact is gone, because just a few rapid precision hits with a solar weapon, many of the best weapons right now are solar anyway, so this will grant you Radiant, essentially for free. Elemental Benevolence, whenever you grant your allies an elemental buff via Ascension or something else, it will give you class ability energy. Like I said, if you don't want this, we're actually running 3 perks here when we could be running 3 here. So I would instead run Threaded Blast or Elemental Daze if you are running solo, which I will be using Elemental Daze in my personal solo ops setup version of this. So it would look a little bit more something like this for my solo setup, versus in groups, it just gives you more Ascension, which gives you more outright damage, and it's just really nice to use. I also rock Refresh Threads in the third column, picking up an elemental pickup, so this meaning actually picking up the Tangle will grant you extra energy to your least charged ability. This is not necessary, but it is nice to have for just even more ability generation and cooldown reduction. In the fourth column, I would highly recommend Cauterize Darkness. Any strand debuffs you apply will make your solar damage just deal more damage in general to them. This combines really well with our fragments to just cause our solar grenades to deal tons of damage, generate tons of transcendence energy, and then deal more damage when we are transcendent. Elemental Daze, the one I mentioned before, it basically just makes it so whenever you stun a champion, it will make them ignite and apply Scorch to them and nearby targets because we are using a primarily solar weapon, or it will sever them if you are using a strand weapon in order to cause the stun. Threaded Blast, whenever you destroy a Tangle with strand damage specifically, not just any kind of damage, it has to be with strand damage. So you would have to be destroying it with something like a Mint Retrograde, the Call Sidearm, something like that, and that would cause the radius and explosion to the radius and damage to increase. Elemental Coalescence is the third that I would pick here, which defeating targets creates an elemental pickup, matching your equipped super. This creates more Tangles if you are using Silk Strike. This creates more Stasis Shards if you are using Silence and Squall. This creates more Void Breaches if you are using Tether. And then this will combine extremely well with Shield Crush, because if you remember, we get a matching elemental pickup due to our Facet of Purpose. So whenever you would get that, you would get Woven Mail, Frost Armor, or Void Overshield. All of these help you to take less damage. We get Radiant essentially for free, so as long as you have one of those 3 buffs from the elemental pickups, and you will also have Radiant and Amplified almost all of the time. This means that Shield Crush gives you overall increased damage and ability recharge for every ability you have. Combine this with Radiant Shrapnel, dealing any kind of sustained weapon damage while you are Radiant, or defeating a Scorched combatant, all of the combatants will be Scorched, will cause the target to release solar projectiles that deal damage and do more Scorch. All in all, this creates a huge symphony of explosions and destruction and everything. If you're running the Lustrous set with it, a lot of the kills will heal you, so I highly recommend this build. It is very fun. It will make you feel like a wizard in Dungeons & Dragons if you have ever played it. Just fireball on everyone. If you want the full set of mods, here they are. I'm basically trying to get as many stacks of armor charge as possible. That way they last as long as possible, so that my class font and my grenade fonts will help as much as possible. I also run Ashes to Assets so that I can continue to get more super energy from my grenade kills. This dual siphon mod is not a solar siphon, it just looks like a solar siphon. And if you enjoy these kinds of videos, feel free to let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and peace, gamers.